Well, there is a big deadline coming up for Conservatives this Thursday. That's when leadership candidates will have to declare if they're running. The party is rebuilding after last fall's election. The Conservatives dominated in Western Canada but could not win enough support in the Greater Toronto Area or in Atlantic Canada. Preston Manning has a new book he hopes will inspire the next generation of Conservatives. It's called Do Something.
On what day will these illegal blockades be taken down?
We have gone through hours of meetings with you.
He doesn't give a about their rights.
I remind those who are now heckling me that you are breaking the rules of this place when you do so.
Que c'est sa propre volonté de financer.
That party wrapped themselves in the flag every chance they got.
The level of rhetoric and rage fueling politics right now is just one of the reasons Preston Manning says he's worried about Canada. Manning founded the Reform Party in 1987. A decade later, he was leader of the official opposition.
If the government makes higher spending its number one priority, there will be no surpluses.
Since then, he's been an influential Conservative voice, and in his new book, he's still pushing for reform. He says democracy in this country is in trouble. Why? Populism, for starters. He says politicians today are getting it wrong, that it doesn't have to be rooted in fear.
That you can take that bottom-up energy and discontent, and it can be wild and woolly, but it can be directed into something positive and constructive.
But he's also worried about trust. Manning believes politicians aren't really listening to voters. Why, he writes, should I respect and trust you when you don't respect and trust me? Part of what chips away at that trust is how politicians are using social media. It's one of the key parts of Manning's new book. He says we need to take, quote, the nastiness and polarization out.
À l'ordre, order.
And Preston Manning is here to talk about all of that with us. He is joining us from Calgary. Thanks for making time for us, Mr. Manning. Let's start with that nastiness and polarization that you write about. One of the candidates for the Conservative leadership, Peter MacKay, as you may know, recently deleted a tweet. And in that tweet, he seemed to support a vigilante response to the blockades we've been seeing. In another tweet, he referred to some protesters as thugs. What does all that say to you?
Well, again, it's that's unfortunate, but I think if one is a practicing politician, I think this business of instantly replying to everything is dangerous. I've written op-eds and that all my life. I've given speeches. I've had a habit when I get it all done and I think I've got it right and I've even got the lines for you, I set it aside for a day and come back to it. In the social media world, people don't do that. They just instantly react to whatever's being said, and I actually think that's dangerous, and it's dangerous for a politician. My worry is that this chattering on the social media has become a substitute for doing anything. So I say, particularly to young people, this is fine. Involve yourself in the social media, say a lot, listen a lot, complain a lot, tweet a lot, blog a lot, but at the end of the day, decide, are you going to do anything about what you've just been dealing with in the social media?
What do you specifically think people should be doing on social media differently? By people, I mean politicians.
I guess the challenge is, like any technology, is try to stress the positive and suppress the negative. I've been involved in candidate recruitment almost my entire life, and one of the most disturbing things right now is if you try and get some substantive person that's got a lot to contribute, maybe high ethical standards, strong background that would be useful in government or the Parliament, the legislature, the biggest single reason they give now for not even considering candidacy is, I will not subject myself, or more often than that, my partner or my family, to the abuse that I know I'm going to get through the social media. So I think we have to address that, or fewer and fewer ethical, competent people are going to even put their foot in the water.
And if they do put their foot in the water, they also have to then decide if they're going to embrace populism, or at least the particular brand of populism that's such a force in politics right now.
One should take a neutral approach to populism. It can turn into something negative and bad, but by and large, they've been good. In fact, one of the major achievements of populist movements was to get women to vote.
Mr. Manning, you've talked a lot in your career about the importance of addressing environmental concerns and climate change, but Lisa Raitt said she lost her seat in the last election because voters told her they didn't think the Conservatives had a strong enough platform. Why is that still such an open question for the party?
Well, I've got two big chapters on that whole section. I do think Conservatives have to have a stronger position on environmental protection, and I don't see anything philosophically incompatible with conservatism and the environment. Conservation and conservatism come from the same root. If you go through it, that every economic activity has environmental consequences. Some of them are bad. You can try to fix the bad ones by massive government intervention in the economy, macro regulation, micro regulation, policy on top of policy. That's one approach, basically the approach the current government has taken. Or you can say for every negative environmental impact, we're going to figure out what you got to do to avoid or mitigate it, and we're going to include the cost of the avoidance or mitigative measures in the price of the service of the product. So the people that are using it pay for the environmental protection.
Why do you think it's not happening? There were so many questions throughout the last campaign. It still seemed to be a stumbling block. Why isn't there clear action?
The biggest problem is that the science that is connected with environmental conservation has been primarily championed in the political arena by liberals and socialists for whom conservatives do not have a very high regard. And what they're really reacting to is the political champions of that science, not really the science.
What's the ideal candidate for the Conservatives right now in this time in Canada?
Well, I do think it's someone that can reconcile some of these big conflicting interests, many of which have been aggravated by the policies and the lack of action by the current government.
How confident are you that they're going to make the right choice?
Well, I hope for the best. I hope for the best. It's not an easy thing. And I think one thing all the parties have to watch, this idea that there's some miraculous leader that will appeal to every region of the country and every sector of the electorate and be a super communicator and a lawmaker and a policy maker and a decision maker. There's no such leader like that. What you can get is someone with competence in one or two or three areas, and they've got to build a team around them that have those other components. And I think the sooner the political establishment figures that out and stop looking for the Messiah and look for the team, whatever party does that best is going to be best off.
What's your message to voters?
Well, I remind them of what's called the iron law of politics. If you choose to not involve yourself in the politics of your country, you will be governed by those who do. So if you don't like those who do, or you don't like what they're doing, your only alternative is to get involved yourself, to do something, not just talk about it.